Welcome to this session on Relational Database Management System. My name is Ashish Jain. I am an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Applications at the Bhopal School of Social Sciences. Let's begin today's session. In this session, we will be covering the topics like Introduction to ER Model, Components of ER Model, Types of Entities, Attributes, and also different types of attributes that we have in ER Model. This is in continuation with our previous module in which we have discussed about different types of data models. Now we are elaborating those data models that are very important for you. Entity relationship model. This entity relationship model is also known as ER model in short, and it is a very high level conceptual data model that allows us to describe the data that is involved in a real world enterprise in terms of objects and their relationship. What does it mean is that whatever information we need to store in the database, we represent that information in terms of some kind of properties, and these properties are called attributes. For example, if you need to store the details about a student is not a single entity. So it has a range of values associated with a student, such as student's roll number, name, class, etc. So all these together gives information about one student. Hence we consider student as a real world entity. So anything for which we store the information in a database is called an entity. So this entity relationship model is used in conceptual design, that is the logical design, not the physical one, and this is separate from the physical representation of the data on the disk. Here we have three important components. The first component is entity, second one is the relationship among those entities, and the third important component is the attributes with which we relate the elements together. So ER modeling is actually the use of the concepts of ER modeling and develop some kind of diagrammatic representation, and these diagrammatic representations are known as ER models or simply ER diagrams. Now we come to the components of ER model. Here in ER we have three important components. The first one is the entity, second one is the attribute, and the third one is relationship. In terms of entities, we have the strong entity and the weak entity. Then attributes are further divided into simple, multi-valued, key, derived and composite attributes. And about relationships, we have n-ary relationship, we have unary relationship, we have binary relationship, and we have ternary relationship. Now let's start with the entity part. So as we have mentioned, entity is for which you represent the data in a database. Entity is an object in the actual or the real world that can be identified from other objects. For example, I have a rectangular shaped remote. I'll store the details such as the type of remote, number of keys in that remote, the size of remote, and other properties associated with it. On the other hand, I have to represent the details of a mobile phone which is also rectangular in shape. Now these two, though they are same in shape, but they have different properties by the use of which we can distinguish between a remote and a mobile. In the same manner, in the real world, there are many things that have some kind of similar properties, but the values of those properties makes them different from each other. For example, in a school or a college database, students, teachers, classes, courses, etc., these all are entities. And these entities have some properties or attributes that give them their distinguished identity. So here we have a table known as student table. Here we have three columns. First one is called roll number, second name, and then course. So each of these represent the detail of one student. That means one entity. So the one row of information is called a tuple, and a whole bunch of tuples is called record, right? Such type of representation in tabular format is called relational model. Second is the entity set. An entity set is a collection of similar types of entities. For example, the details of all the students. The properties remains the same, but we have the different values for different students, right? So this is called entity set. It is a set or a collection of similar types of entities. Here it is very important that no two entities in an entity set will have the same values for the attribute. So there may be some variations in the values of the attributes. For example, a student may contain all the students of a school. Similarly, a teacher set contains all the details of a teacher of a particular faculties and so on. Here again we will take the same example. We have roll number, name and course. So each course has a different name in the name of the taker of that course. even though the name is same, but we have certain distinguished values with which we can distinguish between two records of the same type. Then types of entity set. Entity sets are classified into two categories. First is the strong entity set, then we have the weak entity set. A strong entity set is an entity set in which we use a primary key for identification of the records, using which entities in a table can be uniquely identified. It is also known as a regular entity set. So, if you represent it in terms of an ER diagram, this is a representation of an ER diagram. Later on we will see how we create this diagram. So, here the entities are represented by rectangles. So, here in this diagram we have two entities, first is the student and second is the course. The relationship between student and course is represented using a diamond box, right? And whatever is the primary key, that means the main key value on the basis of which you can distinguish between records of the same type, is known as primary key, and it is shown by underlying it in the diagram. Next we have the weak entity set. So, there are certain situations in which we cannot have a clearly one distinguishable key value on the basis of which we can distinguish between records. Such entities in which we do not have any primary key element is called a weak entity set. Now, how do we distinguish? So, for discriminating between entities in an entity set, a weak entity set uses a kind of a dependency or a relationship with a very strong entity set. So, in this diagram we have two different entities, student as well as course. Since student has a distinguished feature or a prominent primary key, which is the student number or the batch number, but in course we do not have such number. So, we represent a weak entity set by double lines. Though we use a rectangle, but we use double lines to create that rectangle, and also the relationship is represented using a diamond box with a double line. Now, we come to next component, which is attribute. Attributes are those properties by which we represent the values of entities, and together if you join all the properties you get the information about one particular entity. Attributes also define what type of data is stored in a database table. For example, a student entity may have its name, the class and age as attributes, and based upon the type of the values it stores, it has a definite type. A name has a alphanumeric type, class has a alphanumeric type, age is a numeric type, and so on. So, to define the type of values an attribute contains is called domain or range of the values. Domain is set of allowed values in a particular attribute. A student's name cannot be a numeric value, this is a constraint, so that we ensure that we do not enter wrong information in any particular column. Now, we see different types of attributes. Attributes are classified into 6 major categories. We have simple attribute, composite attribute, single value attribute, multi-value attribute, derived attribute, and key attributes. Let us see them one by one. First is the simple attribute. As the name suggests, a simple attributes are atomic values. Atomic means single. They have only one value for a particular column or a property at a time, which cannot be further divided. For example, a student may have one phone number that contains 10 digits. So, this is a diagrammatic representation. We have a student table or a student relation, which is an entity represented using a rectangle. Attributes are represented using oval boxes or ellipses. So, we have roll number, which is a primary key. So, we have underlined it. We have class and age. Then we have composite attribute. Composite attributes are a combination of different attributes value into one. For example, a student name can be generated using first name, middle name and last name. Similarly, in this example we have the address, which is a combination of street, city as well as the state. So, the attribute whose value can be formed by combining the values of different attribute is called a composite attribute. The next type is a single value attribute. As the name suggests, it may contain only one atomic, that is the single value. For example, roll number. A person can have only one roll number or one official name and so on. Similarly, we have multi-value attribute. If in a particular column, if we have more than one values for a particular property, it is called multi-value. For example, phone number. A person may have one or more phone numbers. email addresses, etc. So these are multi-value attribute, and multi-value attributes are depicted by using a double line ellipses or oval boxes. Just in this example, we have the mail ID as well as mobile number as multi-value attribute. Then we have derive attribute. Derive attributes are those attributes whose value need not to be entered. We can find the value by on the basis of other values. For example, if we have entered the salary part, and if we need to calculate the average salary given by a particular department, so we just have to find the total of all the salaries divided by total number of persons whom the salary is given, will get the average value, right? So for calculating the average salary, we need not to take much inputs for the average salary value. Similarly, if you have entered the date of birth or date of joining of a person, we can calculate the age. So we need not to separately get the age from the user. And to represent derive attribute, we use dotted lines. So in this first example, we have the age column, which is shown using a dotted line. That means it's a derive attribute. So on the basis of date of birth, we can calculate the value of age. Next, we have the key attributes. These key attributes are those attributes which can identify the entity uniquely in an entity set. So if you have more entities of the same type, to distinguish between two entities, we require such an index value. For this, we require the key attribute. Generally, primary key values are key attributes. Later in this module, we will be seeing different types of keys. For example, student ID in a student table can be a key value. So because any student cannot have this more than one student ID. Though the name of students can be same, their surnames can be same, their class can be same, their percentage can be same, and many other properties can be same, but they have different IDs. So this ID is a differentiating factor, that's why it is called a key attribute. Let us look back what we have covered in this module. We started with the introduction to ER module. We have seen different components of ER module. We have seen different types of entities that we have, and we have seen different types of attributes. I hope this session is beneficial for you. Thank you. Keep learning.